All right, I think it's time. So my name's Kelly McKay. I'm the program coordinator for Andover Elder Services. Welcome to our webinar entitled Financial Challenges in Retirement, presented by the Andover Mentors. The Andover Mentors are comprised of Jeff Kaplan, Roland Jacobson, and Don Schroeder. They are a volunteer group that researches and presents on different important topics that are pertinent to the senior population. We are very fortunate to have the Andover Mentors present for us today. They will introduce themselves as they speak. A few housekeeping announcements. This is a webinar, so if you are an attendee, we cannot see you and we cannot hear you. So sit back and relax, take some notes as we go along. If you have questions during the presentation, we invite you to utilize your Q&A function found at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on which device you're using. If you use that function throughout, we will interrupt the presentation and ask that question in live time. If you want to wait for your question at the end of the presentation, you can still utilize that Q&A function, or you can actually use the raise hand function. So again, that's another button at the bottom or top of your screen. If you raise your hand, we'll actually bump you over so you can ask your question using your own voice. Also, we will be recording today's presentation. So if you have to hop off halfway through, or if you just want this presentation to rewatch over and over again, you can either email me, I put my email in the chat, or you can email the Andover Mentors. Their email will be shown at the end of the presentation. And finally, the last housekeeping announcement is I have to do a disclaimer due to the nature of this topic. So Dawn, if you don't mind bringing up that disclaimer slide for me.
You can avoid the picture.
We'll go back to that picture. So here's our disclaimer. I'm just going to read the first half, and the rest of it is there for you to reference back to. So the information provided herein are the opinions of the presenters. It's educational only and does not constitute investment advice, nor does it constitute an offer to buy or sell shares or units in any of the investment funds or other financial instruments described herein. In addition, the information provided herein is not an offer to provide financial or wealth management services. This information should not be used as a substitute for suitable investment and product-related advice, which is available from a professional financial advisor, and so on. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to the Andover Mentors. Thank you again for being here today.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks a lot, and also appreciate everybody joining us today. The Andover Mentors, you've met the three of us. I'm the good-looking guy in the middle. Don Schroeder. I've been involved in many nonprofit organizations in my work career though. I was a retail and commercial banker in the Merrimack Valley, and as I said, on nonprofits, I've served on many boards as treasurer, president, and did spend about 10 years on the Andover Finance Committee. So we joined together, the three of us, and we all kind of have a special expertise. We like to think it's special, but we're providing you with this today, and we enjoy doing it. These are the survey questions you were asked when you signed up. As you can see, 80% of the people that responded do have a budget, 20% don't. When you look at the planning that you need to do with regards to wills and trust, majority, again, 63% have done some estate planning, 37 have not yet. Are you concerned about running out of money? This was interesting that it's closer to 50% saying that they were concerned about it. 43% not. The last questions we asked were, where are you at in your retirement planning? So the majority are retired, but it's just, a little bit over 50%, where there's still a good number, 44%, who are planning out 1 to 2 years and not sure. So 50-50 on who's retired, and that helps us out in understanding who the audience is. Financial challenges in retirement. There are plenty of opportunities that seniors enjoy during their retirement from all the hard work they put in. But there's a lot of questions to get to retirement and in really enjoying that. And we're exploring those in 3 areas. And I'm going to take on the planning and budget. Roland will take on investment and savings. And Jeff will do what can go wrong. Okay, financial challenges, I think we all agree that the biggest financial challenge is really where to live. Most of us, we're lucky enough we can stay in our home. But as things change, we look at downsizing for health reasons, and it could also be financial. So you could want to look at a smaller home or look into condominiums. There are many different alternatives. We do a program on where to live and discuss kind of the over 55 communities, long-term care. So we're not going to get into that today. We're talking more about what you can affect to change your financial concerns. And moving into a smaller apartment, downsizing, you don't have the overhead, the upkeep to maintain. You also want to consider things like moving to a warmer climate. And a lot of the seniors we meet are looking to live by their family. The family has moved, so they've also considered moving to another area. Moving south, even being with friends is another consideration, back to the old neighborhood in the summer when it gets too hot, down south. One of the last things I think a small minority even look at, and that's to move in with family. This sometimes is a best idea, and I think it depends on the individuals involved. It also could be putting a burden on the younger generation where as you age, a little bit harder to move out and get into an adult community, but it certainly is an option. The cautionary tale, though, here is that you want to test the water before you just jump into it. You don't want to suddenly move to an area, and I've heard of people getting homesick and then wanting to move back home. They bought property in another area. And the second item here really addresses that. Sometimes it's hard or almost impossible with the change in the values of homes here in the Merrimack Valley and the Northeast. You really have seen a big appreciation. It's changing in other areas too. From what I hear, Texas and even Florida, it's getting more expensive to live all the time. So this is one thing you want to make sure where you're going to live, you're going to be staying there. You want to visit the prospective area at different times of the year so you know that the weather is not going to be too severe for you. When you decide to move where your family is, that's kind of could have a good and a bad side, because sometimes the children get promotions in their work and they're going to be moving on. Your grandchildren, they grow up, they become independent, and the amount of time you took and even taking care of them maybe, it's just very difficult then. You might be left in an area where the family now is looking to move from. Talk to others. And I know Jeff has had some experience in this, and he's gone through, moving from different areas as his family has moved and things have changed. So he might get into that a little bit. This is an interesting slide, and Roland provided me with this information. Half or over half of all seniors count on Social Security for 50% of their income. And that's a pretty tough number these days with the cost of living going up, taxes, and the cost of housing. And it's even worse for unmarried seniors. So a single senior, they're looking at 47% of those seniors count on Social Security for 80% of their income. So that's a tough number, I think. When you're looking at where you're going to live or how you're going to survive in retirement, the best plan is to start with a budget. One of the questions we had is, are you worried about money running out? And when I visited with an attorney who was doing some estate planning, she said that all of her clients had that worry. And she didn't have one single client that ever spent all their money. So while it's a perceived problem, I think that it could be worse than you think. And one way to assure yourself that you've got enough funds is to do a budget. Here we go through different steps. Initially, grabbing the information you have around the house so you can determine what you've been spending, what obligations you have. We even suggest you have receipts for 3 months, maybe even 6 months, so that you can kind of estimate what your cost of running the household, groceries, and any of those expenses. You also want to get any loan statements or mortgage statements. Number 2 on there, I kind of ran by, but that's calculating your income. I think it's probably the easiest. You've gotten statements from Social Security. If you have a pension, you will have some documentation for that. The any income from your investments, once you have those investment statements, you can pretty well calculate that. Then what we need to address is the expenses. Here's kind of a list of different things to consider. On one side, we have the essential expenses, things that you just have to pay. Your housing costs, taxes, groceries, personal care, insurance. There's a long list, and there's always the other things you don't think of. You can always add to this list. Discretionary are those items that you can make a difference or you can change. They're not like the mortgage that has to be paid every month. You can decide to cut back on your eating out. Your travel can be luxurious, or it could be, bare bones, depending on what you want to spend in this area. Then, of course, you have to plan for the future, new car, any repairs, also loans are those, and I don't put these under discretionary, but you might have to borrow, you might have to find some room in your budget to do repairs to your house. What are the trade-offs? Before I go to that, let me go to the budget. Here's a sample budget that Roland's put together. On the left-hand side, you can see where all those expenses have added up. We've got the mortgage in there, the real estate, the personal expenses, and just line by line, we've entered the numbers in here. You can see then, once we've done the expenses that we know we're going to have to pay every month, we get to the discretionary. In the discretionary, we even have room for savings for a major purchase, a new car, some item that you need to budget for. And at the end of the day, we look at all of our expenses, we come up with $43,000. On the right-hand side, you then have the income, where the funds are going to come from. Your pension, wages, Social Security, your IRA. Once you get to the age of 70 and a half, you have to start taking a minimum required distribution. If you have rental property, of rental income. Also, then you have some expenses that you're going to have to pay. Your taxes, that's going to come off that number. You see that this is an orderly way where you've looked at the income minus the expense. And in this example, there's about $4,100 that is available. If there's more expenses, you can meet it. You can put away some money for savings. But this is a great way to figure out what you're going to need and where the money is going to come from. We have a sample that we can send you that you can fill in the numbers for yourself. And Roland did a great job in putting that together. The challenges, the unexpected cost, this is back on my budget. Things you've got to be concerned with. Your total income, make adjustments. Make adjustments was the area I wanted to get back to. You've done the sample budget. So what can you do? The biggest thing I think is that realizing that you can cut expenses much easier than you can increase your income. Roland will talk about what to do with your investments. So that's one way to increase your income. You might need to get a part-time job if you see expenses are going to be a little bit higher. Continue to work, pick up health insurance. That'll cut you some of your expenses. The downsizing of your home will cut expenses. Moving to an apartment that is not so expensive. These are all ways to cut your costs and bring your budget more in line. Move to a less expensive area. As I was saying earlier, that's changing, but it does give you a chance to cut your expenses. Some areas of the country, you'll find their taxes are a third of what we're paying up here in New England. Refinance your mortgage is if you're going to carry a mortgage and you haven't done it, that's what you really need to do. These are some of the rates that were available as of the end of April. So if your rate is anywhere above that, there are no points. Your closing fees could be anywhere from $800 to $1,500, depending on title insurance, any expenses and appraisal. Those items you'd have to pay out of pocket, but pretty well you're at under 3% anywhere we looked. And I don't know that there's going to be any change in those rates in the near future. If you do have expenses and you need to come up with cash, one way is to have a home equity loan or a line of credit. These don't require payments unless you have a balance. And then they usually, if it's a line of credit, you pay interest only for a period, and they have been running up to 10 years. So each lender is a little bit different. You really need to shop them. I found rates that are a quarter under the prime interest rate that's published in the Wall Street Journal. Some of them even offer 0.5% under the Wall Street Journal rate. And that rate currently is 3.25. Some institutions, this is a bottom rate. The rate will go no lower than that, or it's called a floor. And they also have ceilings that your rate won't go above that rate. But in all cases, you really have to do a job of shopping around, checking out the terms, and spending some time. Another thing I really suggest is both, if you're married and you've got a partner, both of you should be active in these areas so that you understand what you're getting involved with, what the terms and conditions are. And then in case there's God forbid, someone becomes ill, you both will be able to step into those shoes. But the other big thing I'll point out, that reducing your debt before you retire is probably the best way to cut your expenses and to enjoy retirement a lot more. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Roland.
I'm waiting for my phone to quit ringing, but I'm Roland Jacobson. I've been involved working in the investment arena since 1970. My last 20 years at work, when I retired in 2007, I had been working for Fidelity Investments for 20 years. 16 years of that was as an investment consultant to corporations, nonprofit organizations on their investments for managing the nonprofit. And after I retired, I worked for another 10 years locally for an investment advisor as a certified financial planner. I'm still a certified financial planner. I've just retired. Now, what I'm going to talk about is I personally have two basic accounts. I have a retirement account because I don't have a pension. And so my retirement account is an IRA, or an individual retirement account. For those who are still working, it's probably a 401k offered by the company you're working for. Now, if you are still working, well, first of all, there are three objectives that I've always talked to people about that I want from an investment. I want to generate income, which is more important when I'm in retirement than when I am still working. I want to maximize a return with reasonable risk. And what I mean by that is I want to try to avoid a big loss. I want to preserve my capital, which is probably less important if you're still contributing to a 401k than it is when you're in retirement. So in retirement, for me, the most important piece, or my most important objective, is generating income. The second objective, in order of importance, is preserving my capital. In other words, I don't want to have to sell a stock or a bond when the market falls, when the price falls, in order to take out my required minimum distribution. And then, because inflation, although it's been fairly low, I still remember the time in the early 80s when inflation was running at 14.5%, and you could get 18% for a money market fund. And so inflation has been low, but I believe this is my personal belief, with all the government spending and people going back to work, prices are going to rise. This last week, gas prices rose just because a pipeline has been out of service for the East Coast. Chickens are not available. Prices of commodities are going up. So anyhow, in order to take care of inflation in the future, you will have to have stocks in your portfolio, because bonds, once you purchase them, when they mature, you get your principal back. They don't really have any long-term capital appreciation value. Money markets have no long-term capital appreciation value. It's strictly income, although they don't have any downside risk. So those are the three objectives. My second major account is a savings account, or I call it my cash management, cash reserves, my emergency account, whatever you want to call it. And what I do is I take my RMD, my required minimum distribution, monthly, and I put it into that account. And then I transfer, having done my budget, I know how much I have to transfer over into our checking account. And my wife takes care of all the outgo, which keeps her reasonably connected to how much money we are spending as it relates to the budget. Now, each of these two accounts has a different mix of the assets, and I'm going to use simple major assets. Cash or cash equivalents would be a money market fund, savings account, bonds or bond funds, fixed income, and the third element is stocks. If I'm not yet in retirement, my stocks are going to be a bigger portion of my portfolio. In my savings account, I don't have any bonds or stocks. I use it strictly as a savings account. I can spend from it, knowing that I have enough money. Don, why don't we move to the next slide? I thought I'd change this slide, obviously, but I'm going to start from the bottom. If you are not yet retired, I would, possibly start with an aggressive portfolio if I had a 15-year period before I was going to retire. I noticed some people have a 6-year period, so a balanced fund might be the right one. And if you have more than 5-year horizon, you might use a moderate growth portfolio. If you're within the 2 to 5 year period, you want to be quite a bit more conservative, because just before I happened to retire in 2007, 1 year before the financial meltdown. You don't want to have to be grabbing money out of there because you don't have any income anymore. So you want to make sure that you have a whole lot more fixed income, which includes both cash and bonds, and we'll get into that mix a little bit later. As I said earlier, my savings account or my cash reserves account is 100% fixed. I have just a little bit of bonds in there, but I would say that 90% of it is money market funds. If I had any bonds, I would not have anything more than a 1 to 2 year maturity, knowing that I don't have to spend that money for another 1 or 2 years. Don, we'll go to the next slide. Now, if you're still working, what I'd like to do is, well, all portfolios, all retirement portfolios, I believe, have to have some stocks. However, people are worried that it is a gambling situation. But what I want to do is, I pointed out since 1970, for the last 50 years, I've shown the growth or expansion periods, and I've shown the down market periods. We've had 3 significant down market periods of 3 years, back 72 through 74, We had another one through 2001 to 2002, 2000, 2001, and 2002. We had a quick one in 2007 and 8 with the financial meltdown, but most of them are pretty small. Generally, 75% of the time, stocks are returning, are increasing in price, or they are appreciating. So how do we handle these downturns, I think, is one of the points I'd like to point out. Why don't we move to the next slide? If you are, what I've shown here, instead of showing you, I'm showing you two types of accounts. These are single investments. If you are in retirement, if you're still working, your 401k may have what they call target dated funds. So let's say, we start over on the left-hand side, and we are in 45. We have 45 years before we retire, which means we're going to retire in 2065. Most of these portfolios have around 80%, 85% in stocks. Right now, several of the investment companies, T. Rowe Price, Vanguard, Fidelity, they've got a little bit more than 90% because stocks have been returning so well. How long are they going to stay there? I don't know. But historically, they've targeted around 85% stocks until you approach about 20 years before retirement. Then that blue line, they begin to slide down. They begin to sell off the stocks and buy more bonds and add a little bit more in cash or money market funds. And so about 10 years before retirement, they usually have around 70% in stocks and 30% in money markets and bonds. Within the 5-year period, it's about a balanced account, 50% in cash and bonds and 50% in stocks. There are some of these target dated funds that were started way back when that are called target income, and they have about 20% in stocks, and they've been left alone, and the other almost 20% is in cash and 80% is in bonds. I like these kinds of simple single fund options, particularly if they are in a tax deferred account like a 401k or an IRA. If you have taxable accounts, I'm less comfortable with them because they are constantly buying and selling, and therefore capital gains, dividend or capital gains will be part of the equation. The nice part is that the investment company will constantly rebalance them. Why don't we move on to target allocation funds? I helped develop these in Fidelity a long time ago, and I've tried to simplify it a bit. For the growth, notice the stocks are about 85%, treasury bills, money markets are 5%, and bonds are 10%. The income fund on the far right is 70% in money markets and 30% in bonds with no stocks. I happen to use a balance account, and there's a reason for it. I have a required minimum distribution of about 5.5%. I have 10% in money markets, and they're generating about 2% a year in income. That means I've got to come up with another 3.5% a year from either bonds or stocks. Given that I have 10% in treasury bills, if I divide that by 3, that gives me the 3% a year I need for these 3-year periods of the most severe market downturns. So I wouldn't have to sell a bond, or I wouldn't have to sell a stock in a market downturn of 3 years or less. Notice in the income portfolio over in the far right, in the market correction of 2008, it was the only place that you made money because bonds actually returned 13% in 2008, while stocks were down 37%. And that combination would have given you a positive 5% return on your cash or your income portfolio. Don, we'll go ahead forward. Oh, Don, go back one moment, please. I'm sorry. I forgot something about a rule of thumb. Historically, a rule of thumb about how much you ought to have in stocks was you take your age and you subtract it from 100. Let's say I'm 80, which I'm almost 80. I would then subtract 80 from 100. That means I would have 20% in stocks. That's the old rule of thumb. Because we're living longer and money markets are producing less, the new rule of thumb is you take 120 and subtract your age. I'm 80 years old. I subtract 80 from 120, and I should have at least 40% in stocks in order to generate the longer term amounts that I'm going to need. In retirement, I generally, a person starts by taking out about 4% a year, and it goes up each year as you age. The new RMD requirements, required minimum distribution, starts at 72.5 now. And at 72.5, I've got to take out about 4%. Now, the other thing I do is I like to have what I call a ladder, or I structure my fixed income investments. I was looking at my IRA the other day, and I noticed that I've got in 2021, 2022, 23, and 24, the next 4 years, or the first 4 years, I've got enough bonds in there that they will mature, and they'll mature at appreciation, and they cover what my income needs are. A lot of friends I have, they're comfortable with CDs. And what I would like to show you down below is probably the best CDs available in the local area are from a small savings bank. A 6-month CD you can get with 0.25% return. 1 year is 50% return. 2 years is 0.75%, excuse me, 0.5% in 1 year, 0.75% for 2 and 3 years, and 1% for 5 years. Well, right now, 5-year bonds are yielding already 1%. So I'm not sure that I would want to invest that far out in CDs, but they are available. And the more deposit, the higher the return. Oftentimes, the higher the deposit, or the larger the CD that you have to purchase. Up above, I wanted to show you Treasury rates in 2006. Remember when we were getting 5% for money markets on the 3-month at December 2006? But notice that by the 7-year, it was less by about a 0.25%. And that was kind of in anticipation that the economy was going to dip. When the short-term rates are higher than long-term rates, it's an indication, beware. Inflation may be inflation will show up, or the economy is beginning to soften. In 2008, we were in a recession. The Federal Reserve Board dropped interest rates all the way down to 0.1%, and in order to get the economy going again, they did some other things as well. Now, in end of 2020, notice that the three-month rate was still at 0.1% thereabouts. The 10-year securities were at 1.1, but by the end of the first quarter of this year, rates had risen by about to 1 3. The 7-year rate, excuse me, the 10-year rate had gone to 1.7%. That's about a 0.5% change, and a 0.5% change resulted in about a 3.5% loss in most average bond funds. So again, this is a lot of jargon that you might want to talk to an investment advisor about if you are concerned about bonds falling in price, or how do they rise in price. Why don't we move on, Dawn? I guess I've always talked about this. This is, well, I have a degree in mathematics. I've been involved in the investment committee. I used to write the reports for the income managers, the fixed income or bond managers, and for the growth and income guys at Fidelity. If you might consider, if you are concerned and are, you're doing something other than a single investment type of a target portfolio or target allocation portfolio, an advisor might be a good investment. However, realize that they're going to charge you probably 1 to 1.5%. And if most of them use mutual funds, which will add about another 0.5% a year. So you're talking 1.5 to 2% that will be diminished from your overall return. And if you have questions, we'd love to hear them in the chat, or you might raise your hand before we go on to what can go wrong. And I've mentioned some of those. So why don't we turn it over to Jeff? Jeff?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Kaplan. I have been involved in teaching and training for more than 40 years. A lot of that was actually in schools, but also in colleges. And most recently, I've been involved with the University of Florida's Money Mentor program. Not unlike ours, we focus on different groups of people who needed assistance with their budgeting and planning and all of that good stuff. Not everybody has the good luck to have somebody like Roland in your family who can help you out. So if that's the case, questions need to be answered, and the money mentors in Florida and the ones here try to do that. Here in Andover, in addition to do money mentoring along with Roland and Don, I'm on the Council on Aging for the town of Andover and work with Elder Services on planning programs and helping out in delivering them. All right, first question, what can go wrong? We're going to go through a series of things that can go wrong. And once, as Roland pointed out, please send a Q&A in or raise your hand if you have a specific question about a topic that's on hand right now. I can be made easily aware and be glad to answer your questions. The important thing for you is to get the information that you need so that you can answer the questions that you have and also do that planning that is so important. As most of you have already retired, my guess is you've done a good share of planning along the way, but you need a plan for that. You need to know what it is that your income and outgoes look like, and you need to think about how that's going to happen in terms of the role of money. A lot of things that Roland spoke of in his presentation gave some details about the way that monies can be invested. I don't know about each of you, but most people, and I'm one, have a financial planning assist from somebody who's a professional like Roland, because you get into those discussions about this type of bond or that type of stock, and it may not be comfortable for you. Well, again, here we are. Roland is the guy who has answers to a lot of those questions. Please ask them. All right, next slide, please. All right, what we're going to talk about is risks, things that can not be easily planned for, but what you can do is look at mitigation strategies, things that are ways to deal with the risks should they occur. And Roland and Don have mentioned a few of those as they've gone along, and I'll pick them up again. First of all, longevity risk is something that is very recent in terms of history. At the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th, average life expectancy was about 37 and 42 for men and women. It was not at all what we deal with today, people living very easily into their 70s and 80s as a general statement. Therefore, what happens is longevity increases, as Roland pointed out, means that you have to have greater resources to survive. And one of the mitigation strategies is to deal with that length of time by investing in pension. If you have a pension from your job, or you have not got one, you can get an annuity, and both of those are fixed return investments. Now, you may not think of your pension at work as an investment, but it is. The company invested money for your retirement, and you collect it at a rate that's fixed and does not change over time. In some cases, there are even escalators for inflation. But for the majority of us, if you have a pension, thinking about cashing it in is a temptation, especially when the market is sailing and you think, well, I can do better if I invested it elsewhere. The truth is, it gives you a degree of stability in your retirement income, which is very hard to achieve in any other way. An annuity is something that doesn't come from your employer, but rather through an insurance company or a bank. And it's a fixed rate of return on an investment that, let's say you take some of your retirement funds and you invest, and you get back a percentage every month, and it goes on as long as you're alive to cash it in. Inflation risks. Well, you've seen a lot of reacting on any of the shows that are speaking about the way the market is going today. People are concerned about inflation because of the tremendous increase of monies that have gone into circulation as a result of some of the assistance required and given by the government for COVID and the problems it caused for people to work. There are lots of other things that have happened that can cause inflation. If you look at the price of gasoline in most of the country today, it's higher than it was last week by a good 5 or 10 cents. And that's as a result of having that computer problem at one of the major shipping companies that ships that gasoline through a pipeline to the Northeast. Fortunately, it's mostly not affecting us here in Massachusetts as much as elsewhere in terms of supply, but in terms of price, it is affecting. So inflation is when prices go up, you can't buy as much with the same dollar as you could have a while before. And there are a number of things that you can do in mitigation for that. One is stocks. As Roland pointed out, in the majority of years, if you go over a 50-year period, there are only 3 or 4 periods of time where stocks did not exceed the growth of anything else in terms of what your investments might be in. There are a special kind of investment called an inflation protected security, a TIPS. And what they do is you're actually investing some of your money in a stock which will pay inversely. So if the rate of inflation goes down, your TIPS doesn't change very much. But if it should go up, it will go up with it. And what that does for you is it gives you an opportunity to have an increased income based on inflation changes, which can be very helpful in certain points of times. Interest rate risks. Okay, we were just speaking in Roland's example about, and Don too, about the mortgage rates and how they have changed over the past few years and over time a great deal. Lower interest rates reduce retirement income and savings. Interest rates are a reflection of the business activity and a reflection too of the kind of investments that you have. Some of the mitigation strategies that you might employ are, first of all, asset allocation. And what that is kind of a covering topic under the subject of what Roland was talking about: stocks, bonds, funds, or savings accounts. In other words, you allocate your resources, you put your resources into a variety of things, and you manage it according to your age and the requirements of income that you will have, so that you will hopefully maintain a steady level of income over time. And a bond ladder is something Roland mentioned as well. And what that basically says is I'm investing money that will mature at fixed periods over time. And you will have, 6 months or 12 months for a CD, for example. And if you have them in a series for the next 2 or 3 years, you'll know over that period of time, you'll get that kind of income from that investment. So it's a way of managing changes that might occur as a result of interest rates. Next slide, please. Stock market losses can be seriously reduce your retirement savings. One of the things that Roland was describing was trying not to sell your stocks or bonds at lowered prices as a result of a market drop. And what that means is basically you're going to try and retain resources which are not so very in danger of having those kinds of changes, and use ones that maintain a steady flow of income. And once again, asset allocation, apportioning the way you put your money into savings or how you invest it after you're retired in places that will give you a variety of responses at differences in time, the differences in the market and how it changes. So asset allocation, again, is a very good strategy there. Business risks refers to things like losses of pension funds, which can occur if the employer that sponsors the pension should go bankrupt, or the insurer that is providing the annuity becomes insolvent. Now, those changes are really kind of rare, but it's been known to happen. And mitigation strategy number 1 is what is provided by the government. It's called pension guarantee, pension benefit guarantee. And what that does is it provides a percentage of your usual pension payments to you, regardless of whether the business that is backing it or had originally backed it has become insolvent. So it gives you a degree of security in knowing that your pension will not be gone. And by the way, the pension is one of those few things in your portfolio that is, as with certain kinds of investments, guaranteed. Like if you have a fund that is a guaranteed return. An emergency fund. It's easy to say, but having some extra money put aside for those things where the furnace starts to leak, the car's transmission falls out, or all of those other things which are unlikely to happen on every week kind of a basis, but does happen with all of us. And you look around and you go, oh gosh, now what do I do? If you have an emergency fund out there, you don't have to go dipping into your savings in a great way. That's very helpful because it will not disrupt your income that way. Okay, next slide, please.
Jeff, I'm going to interrupt you. I have two questions
Go.
from the audience. All right, the first question, when and why would you need a CPA, tax planner, or tax attorney?
All right. A CPA is a certified public accountant. A tax attorney is obviously somebody who's very knowledgeable about taxes. And the third one was?
Sorry.
You don't be sorry.
Third one was the tax attorney.
Okay. And I'm going to do the less than honorable thing and turn it over to Roland to explain how to do that. Step up to the microphone, Mike, Roland, and then explain it if you can. I know you can.
Okay, I've been doing my own taxes for years and years. However, as I age and my wife's not familiar with it, I am now engaging the services of a CPA who can at least do my taxes. We're also going to meet because here in the state of Massachusetts, we have an estate tax. Each person has an exclusion allowance of $1 million. If I and my wife as a couple have more than $2 million, the question is how much am I going to owe to the state of Massachusetts in my passing? So that might have some basis on for a CPA with tax knowledge or a tax attorney. A tax attorney usually is probably better used during the development of your planning documents for a trust. And again, there's federal estate taxes, there's state estate taxes. They structure your trusts according to, in order to minimize taxes. That's one reason for a trust. The other reason for a trust is so that you don't have to enter probate with those assets that are not managed under a contract, like an IRA or an insurance policy. I don't know that I've answered them all, but those are the reasons that I've approached a CPA with a tax background in order to answer some of my questions. My wife and I put money away in a 529 plan for a granddaughter who's never going to use it. So now we've got this little piece of asset, not very much, $30,000, $40,000, but there's some penalties that go along if we take it, and I don't know exactly what those are. So I need help.
I think I just add that things have gotten more complicated, and instead of you in retirement, working on the taxes and having to keep up with the laws, you can spend more of your time enjoying yourself, and that's when you might decide that you'd need a CPA. As Roland says, I agree with him. I've talked to a tax attorney. When you're working out your estate, you really need somebody who knows the laws, tax laws of the state that you're living in.
Thank you, Roland and Don.
It's even more important if you have property in multiple states. A lot of people own a piece of property in Florida and they own property here or in New Hampshire. I know somebody owns 3 pieces of property in 3 different states. So it gets very complicated, Don, as you said.
And we have another question, if the mentors are ready. The question is, one worry of mine now before retirement is when I actually do retire and start withdrawing money, how much of a tax bite will there be? How can I be made to worry less about this?
Okay, there are a number of things to consider. First of all, how is your money invested? If your money is invested in the kinds of things which are directly taxable once they're drawn out, like an IRA, you will experience taxes that are measured by the amount of your income. So whatever tax bracket you're in, the money that you draw out of your IRA can be impacted by that. There are other kinds of funds which are your savings, and if you have money in a CD or a regular savings account, the money that you put in initially is not taxable. What is taxable is the interest that you've earned on it. Roland, Don, have you any other thoughts?
I have a question maybe Roland could answer, and it maybe goes to that audience question, is do I want to take out more money that's taxable when I'm younger, or do I want to spend the money I might have in already taxed that I have in savings?
Generally, you want to spend the tax. I've been told that you want to spend the taxable money first and let the tax deferred accounts continue to build. In other words, you may not want to take more than required minimum if you have a required minimum. One of the things that I've done in the past couple of significant downturns, I actually took some retirement money out of my IRA and I moved it into a Roth. I lost money. I moved it over into a Roth, and it's actually doubled in money since 2008. And I will never have to pay taxes on it unless the government does something nasty to me by changing the rules. But
I have a question for you about that transition that you just described, Roland. I understood it to be that you can only go to a Roth IRA if you're below, I think it's 70 years of age. Is that correct?
You can't contribute to it once you're over 70, but you can convert an IRA into a Roth regardless of your income. It used to have an income limit, yes, but it doesn't anymore.
What about age?
Again, it doesn't have an age limitation at this time or an income limitation. You can't contribute to it after 70 and a half, or now maybe 72 and a half. I don't know. Again, CPA, tax attorney may help with that. But I moved money this last year, a significant amount, when I didn't have to take an RMD, but my cash portfolio diminished by $80,000 to cover my annual expenses. So it got cut down significantly, and I'm now building it back up again. I don't know if I've answered the question, but hopefully I've helped a little bit.
Okay, back to the audience. Did we answer the question? And if not, please let Kelly know via, either the quick Q&A online there or raise your hand. We are very happy to have you ask those questions, because I know when I've gone to presentations like this, and I think we've all experienced something pops into your mind and you wish that you could speak to the people who are presenting. Well, you can. Please remember to do it. All right, we're on slide 26, and the potential challenge for you is the death of a spouse. A death of a spouse can lead to a reduction in pension benefits and or bring additional financial burdens, including lingering medical bills and debts. First of all, let's speak about our spouses. I know in every family I'm familiar with, there's one person who seems to be the one who's most comfortable dealing with the investments and the retirement funds and all of that good stuff. And the other one goes happily along, knowing that it's being well taken care of. One of the other problems with the death of a spouse that's not mentioned here is the loss of that support system. If you don't know a lot about where it is and what it is that you have as investments, you really are at a loss when that person who is most familiar with it is no longer available to help you. There is another time that you would want to go to a professional, a planner or a attorney, to talk about the things that you have by way of investments and savings, and how you can easily or most easily deal with using them when you need them, and what it means to you in terms of a long-term change if you begin using up some of the money differently than might have been done before. All right, and death of a spouse mitigation strategies are life insurance. And as we both know, or all of us know, that there is term life insurance, which is very specific for a certain period of time. And then there's whole life insurance, which is good for the entirety of your life, and you pay up a certain amount, which is guaranteed at the end. And if you reach the maximum payout, let's say you have a $10,000 policy and it's no longer going to be paid for, it's already paid up, the amount in there is insured by investment and it will continue to grow. So you might end up with more than $10,000 at the loss of that person. A will. A will is instructions about how to distribute your funds in the time of death. It is most important that you have your wishes understood. I've heard often that people don't do a will because they're superstitious about it or fearful. Well, think of your kids arguing with each other, and that should make you even more fearful. You want to not have a discord in the family based on something that you could easily fix. A will definitely help you to figure out how that money is distributed. And if they know, they'll feel much better about it later. A trust is where you set up a sort of holding place for certain kinds of assets, your home, potentially other kinds of investments, which then have partial protection from inheritance taxes and other things. And there again is when a professional like an attorney or an accountant can be very, very useful in terms of figuring out how that should work in coordination between your investment people and your legal people. You can spend some time and effort, but it's well worth it because at the end of your lifetime, you know that your money and your wishes will be understood and will get to the people you want them to go to. Changes in marital status. Now, this is a toughie for people like the three of Roland, Don, and I, who've been married for 6-8 weeks now. The idea of losing our spouse in the shopping center is not very likely. So losing them in a divorce court is even less likely. But it happens. And I know it's a little late for a prenuptial agreement, but I can't think of anything else that is going to be helpful in terms of maintaining a marriage that is having difficulty. There are ways to go through the process of divorcing using, again, legal assistance to help you to figure out the most advantageous way for everybody concerned. Next slide, please.
Oh, and we have another question.
Go for it.
Can you clarify why target date funds in a taxable account have tax consequences? Is it capital gains?
Roland, you're going to have to do that.
Okay, I think to repeat the question is about target dated funds in a non-tax deferred account will create capital gains because they're constantly particularly as it begins that downward slide at 20 years out, there's going to be more and more changes. They're going to be selling off the stocks, which have appreciated, to buy more bonds. And so that's why target dated funds in a taxable account get uncomfortable after, when they begin to approach the 20-year mark before using the money. Hopefully that answered the question.
Any
Great.
others, Cal?
Yeah, there's actually two more. So the next one, it's a little lengthy. So here we go. Is it clear that the tax amount you pay after retirement is based as it should be upon tax bracket? But the big question is, how is one's income bracket determined after retirement? That is, if I am retired, I have no income from my employer. So how is tax bracket determined? And then they said, sorry if this is a little naive. No need to apologize.
No need to apologize, and it's a darn good question because it is confusing to think, okay, if I'm not getting money from my employer as in the past, how will they figure out the amount of money that needs to be taxed? Well, first of all income that is taxable, and that includes interest on certain kinds of investments, a kind of return on investment, which is over time, and it's a specific way that they look at things that have gained value over time. It all is set in law. So there are things that will not change regardless of what your period of time is, if you're past working or not. Roland, do you want to speak to some more of the details? And thank you for being there, Roland.
No problem. For those who are interested, I have a sheet that I can actually send you with tax brackets, both for married, head of household, and for singles. One of the things that Jeff talked about, the death of a spouse, will put you in a different tax bracket if you're still receiving the full pension of your spouse who may have passed away. You'll be earning more as a single that might be taxable than if you were still married. Tax brackets are basically, as Jeff is saying, income, Social Security. In the state of Massachusetts, Social Security is not taxed, but it does have a federal tax. And again, it's based on if you have less than $40,000, it's taxed at 50%. If you have more than $40,000 of income, it's taxed at 85%, or 85% of it's taxed. There's just a whole lot of different things. And so maybe if you have that question and you email us, I can forward to you that one page with all my tax bracket stuff on it.
And one thing which we will surely do at the end of this is tell you rather where you can email us and get some of those more in-depth questions looked at by people like Roland. All right, so capital gains, by the way, is a kind of tax that occurs over time and is at a lower rate than regularly earned incomes. And if you've been listening to the culture war that we have going on in Congress right now, they're arguing about raising capital gains, which is a lower rate of taxation than on money that you've earned, for people who have had long-term investments and are particularly wealthy and don't really need, well, that's not fair, don't really have the same loss of income from that earning. So what's happening is the government, in the person of the president and the Congress, are asking to raise taxes to cover some of the expenses that some of the programs that they're asking to have made part of the next step in things, fixing the infrastructure, for example, get paid for by people who have lower tax rates, even though they may be very wealthy, because their capital gains is what is driving that. Roland, did I miss? Roland? Roland, you're on mute, but.
Yes, you covered it fairly well. Congress is actually talking about, well, they're talking about raising, there's three tax brackets for capital gains, 10%, 15%, and 20% based on how much income you have. Now they're talking about raising that 20% up to 40%, just like the highest rate for income tax. It's not a done deal by any means, but I think you answered the question pretty well, unless I've missing something.
Any other questions, Kel?
Yeah, so actually going back to our question about target dated funds in a taxable account,
Yeah.
Someone had a follow-up question to that. They said, is that the same thing as having mutual funds in a taxable account?
Yes, it is. Because most target dated funds are a collection of mutual funds, some stock funds, bond funds, international funds, cash, money market funds. So yes, a mutual fund has the same issue. And even probably mutual funds in a down market, a lot of the managers have to sell things that they wouldn't otherwise sell in order to cover the cash requirements. And so I've often found that capital gains are higher in a year in which the market has fallen. So be aware.
Roland, just real quickly, aren't there mutual funds which are comprised of untaxable things like government bonds or other things which do not have tax on them?
Yes, there are municipal funds that have neither federal or state taxes. So the income on those are tax-free. That's why they call them tax-free funds. But again, they're only in bond format. There's no stocks like that I know of. If they are, I'm unaware of them.
I'm not aware of that either, but ETAs, isn't there an exchange traded fund like that? I thought
there are exchange traded funds that are municipal exchange traded funds, yes.
Okay, now we just added another layer of complication.
Yeah.
We've confused them further, Roland. We're doing our job.
I
I'm
think-
still working on it. Anyway,
I think
go
that
ahead.
the one thing I would add is going back to when you talked about, someone asked the question about income sources, what makes up that income when you're retired? One thing you have to remember, if you have money invested in the market in an IRA, that you do not have to pay state tax on that investment up to the amount of your contribution. Because we did not get a deduction on our state income tax.
And I came originally from New York, and if you didn't hear the accent by now, you're not listening. Where you do have to pay tax on those earnings. So it's just state by state. And
Yeah.
that's one reason a lot of folks are happy to be in Florida, where there is no income tax on income directly from the state. You, of course, have federal, no matter where you go. You can't hide. But in terms of state taxes, it varies from state to state. How are we doing, Cal?
All right, last question for now. Is there a minimum tax threshold when there are capital gains?
Roland, go straight for it.
Ask that question. Kelly, would you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
So it's a little, it says, is there a minimum tax threshold when there are capital gains?
Again, the only thing I can say is that if you make less, I think it's, if their income is less than 40,000, there is no capital gain tax on any capital gains. Over that, the next bracket will be 10%, and I can't remember what the thresholds are. So again, I would have to refer back. It's not immediately in my mind, but thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. Oh, you're at the next slide. You're ahead of me, Don. Go, fella. All right. Unexpected medical expenses. It's only logical as we grow older, we usually have greater healthcare needs and may require more frequent treatment for a number of different health-related issues. Sad but true. The parts get a little rusty and you need to get them oiled every now and then. And we, of course, do have some things that are built in from the government. First of all, Medicare, which is something that you've paid for by way of your taxed income over the course of your working career. And it's there for you. Just one important thing that is an exception is that typically Medicare is applicable to those things where you're in hospital or in medical care specifically defined. Some things are not covered. For example, certain kinds of orthotics for your shoes, or in some cases eyeglasses, depending on your retirement process, you don't necessarily have all of that covered. The other thing about Medicare is typically in hospital or in medical care, costs are covered at about 80% of the charge. And what that means is that there's a 20% piece where you have to have some supplemental kind of insurance. AARP is a good source of that kind of insurance, and it works out that more often than not, there are other things that are available out there for you. There are things called advantage plans under Medicare, which offer different things. My concern is not understanding a lot of the offerings clearly enough to make a choice. There, and again, an expert in that area might help. Long-term care insurance is something that you pay for over time, and you can understand it becomes less expensive if you start paying for it earlier. So waiting till you're in your 60s to say purchase long-term care insurance, while it's very useful, may be much more expensive than it would be if you started it in your 40s or your 50s. So for those of us who have long-term care insurance, the big surprise is the benefit that we signed up for originally has to keep growing with time to cover the inflation in medical costs. But long-term care insurance can be very helpful for those issues which we encounter without any pre-knowledge or any way of preparing other than these couple of items. Okay, a changing in household needs. This, again, Don spoke with regard to looking at other places within your community that you might want to live. Retirees may need to change from living on their own to other forms of housing, such as assisted living or independent living in a retirement community, which combines some assistance with housing. The good news about all of that is there's a number of those kinds of places that are available in our community and nearby communities. The problem with that is it's very often much more expensive than you probably might have imagined if you haven't looked into it, number one. And number two is you might not want to be in a congregate care or a group kind of situation. One of the things that COVID has driven home for a lot of people is the risks that can happen living in a multi-person environment. And a lot of people are, more hesitant than possibly before about considering living in one of those kinds of environments. Very often you don't have a choice, post-surgery or other kinds of illness, you might have to live in one. The best thing is, as Don suggested, is research the options in the area before you need them. If you know what kind of retirement living and assisted livings and other kinds of things we have in the area, you begin to understand what those kinds of things might do to your lifestyle. Another thought to consider is it is not consistent in terms of pricing. If you look at some sort of assisted living or retirement community in Florida, for example, it is usually less expensive and by a good deal than it would be here in Massachusetts. Then if you want to see an upward swing, go to New York and you'll find out it costs even more. It's not consistent. So you need to do your homework here. So researching in advance is the way to go. Next slide, please, Don. Okay, here's a hard one. Unforeseen needs of family members, for example, paying for healthcare costs for an elderly parent, paying higher education costs for your children or grandchildren, providing short-term financial assistance to an adult child in the event of unemployment, divorce, or other financial adversities. This one is difficult. What happens in many cases is that you end up, and I know people who have had this happen, where they've taken their retirement funds to save their family members' neck in one case or another. Very often things that were not planned or could have not have been managed. Your daughter all of a sudden ends up being a widow and you have young grandchildren. You got to help. There's been an injury. You got to help. But how much can you help and how much you afford to help, can afford to help, is something that I would suggest each of us needs to have professional help to describe clearly for us what our circumstances are versus what the needs of the other people are. And with a family, it's very hard to make those decisions. And I sympathize as any of us go through that. Public policy risks would include things like government policies change, which can impact us. For example, if they change Medicare and Social Security, the way the benefits are paid or the amounts, it impacts us. And once again, an emergency fund is probably a good way to go for short term. Having long-term care insurance or that idea of potentially reducing your living costs would be another way. There's very, very, very difficult to predict these kinds of things. To quote Elizabeth Warren, you need a plan for that. You need to know what it is that you're facing, and you need to be thinking about mitigation strategies on different topics and in different ways so that you can be ready to do it. There are lots of online planning tools out there to look at your budget, to look at your retirement income, to look at some changes that can be impacted. There are also books that you can read, but a professional advisor very often is useful. They do charge, it's not a for free thing, but there are some times that you can get complimentary advisory services from colleges or other places which have experts of that kind. Next slide, please. All right, the long-awaited email address. We're AndoverSeniorMentors@gmail.com. If you have a question that we didn't get to answer or a thought that occurs to you later and you want to pop a question to us, please do. As Roland pointed out, he's real good at offering some specific assistance for specific questions if you have them. So AndoverSeniorMentors@gmail.com. Next slide, please.
I saw somebody had their hand up and I didn't know if there was another question. So we have a suggestion for a future topic, but if somebody had a question they wanted to go on mic, you could raise your hand. Again, we'll be glad to address it.
Yep, that individual did put their hand down, but now is a good time if you want to put your hand back up, if you want to come on in and ask your question.
Roland, you want to take the other slides until that happens? This is our
I was
appendix.
going to say, yeah, Roland, please do go back to the appendix. The appendix is full of things which we didn't have time to talk about, and probably would be very specific to some people more than others. Roland, being our expert, is going to talk to the items there since he developed most of them. Go, Roland. Roland, you got to turn off your mute button, bud.
I'm sorry. I originally put these in the original presentation, but it was too long and too detailed. They're concepts on strategic investing. It's about asset allocation, understanding, knowing what you own. What happens with a bond when interest rates rise? What causes stocks to move up and down? Basically, it's earnings forecasts. Are earnings going to be greater than they were in the past? If so, stock prices will rise. Are earnings going to fall? Stock prices will fall. I'm not going to get into them, but they're here. And if you want to download this particular slide, we can send it to you. And then I will be glad to discuss some of these concepts with those who are interested in this kind of detail.
All right, and I like this seesaws a lot. What it does is it talks to the way money prices in maturity are impacted by changes in the stock market and the types of markets. Bull markets, as we pointed out in the slide that Roland had, are most frequently where we are relatively, depending on the time, but markets typically go up. A neutral market is where it sort of hangs out at one level and doesn't go change very often. And that doesn't usually last for very long. A bear market is when there's a decline, like we had today in the stock market. Stocks were down. It wasn't like a tragedy to have it happen, but it certainly is different from the usual this past year with the pandemic upswing of prices. Anyway, there's some things there for other things that I'm not even going to start talking about, but there's some detail on the laddered fund, fixed income, and different portfolio components. Any other questions, please? This is the moment. Or two. And if not, I want to thank, first of all, my co-presenters and Kelly for helping in every way that she does. She's so good at this, and they're pretty good at it too.
So we do have someone that just came in to ask a question. So Anita, if you would like to ask your question, you can just unmute yourself.
Wondering, guys, do you have, and I've had the great opportunity of speaking to Roland in a little more depth. I was wondering if you guys have a book or a resource that you recommend that just gives people the basics on, on financial terminologies and things. It sounds like, Jeff, you might do some college teaching or something like that. Is there like a finances for dummies book? Not something that would take away the need for a specialist, but something that would give, ground level information for people that this just hasn't been their thing ever.
I'm gonna not pass on this because I think you're right. I do know of a number of books. One of the things that's important is that some of them are updated more frequently and are more comprehensive in terms of covering topics. What I do think is that there are lots of resources for you, and I'm going to ask one right here. Roland, do you have a book that you'd recommend?
I do, but it's in the other room and I can't remember. It was purchased for my wife.
Oh, sure, Roland. If that's your excuse.
Okay.
I don't know.
Purchased for my wife, and I think I got the name of the person who asked the question, and I'll send her that title of that book and the author.
That would be great. And if you have an issue with that, I can send an email to your wonderful Andover Senior Mentor Gmail account, and then you'll have me again. Okay. Thank you, guys. This was excellent. I'm sorry to have to bring things down to the level of financially challenged, but that's just where I am.
I understand.
But at least you're not afraid to open up your question to discussing, and that you win the prize, by the way, for brave attendee for the day.
You guys are very approachable. Thanks.
One thing this does remind me, and Kelly, I'd put a plug in for the technology course that, you know, a lot of times I don't have the books in my library that Roland has, but to check up on some of these financial issues or topics, a search of the web is great. You know, you can certainly find articles and just general financial definitions right on the internet by typing in the term you want to find out. And, you know, there's some very well-known financial pages. We should put that together in a little resource.
For
That
sure.
would be
to hand out.
awesome. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
By
You're
the
welcome.
by the way, I have the book. It's called Savvy Investing for Women.
A sexist book, Roland. Shame on you.
I know it's sexist, but I bought. It's fairly simple and it's easy. It gets harder as you read into the book, but at least
Okay. Is there an author on there?
and the author is Marlene Jupiter.
All right. Thank you so much.
Don, you want to I don't know how to show it.
You are.
You are right now.
All right. Perfect.
Thanks, Anita.
Thank you. You met all the.
I guess she's gone. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Roland, Don, you want to hang out a minute?
Yes.
Kelly, you can hang out too.
If anybody has topics out there that they would like maybe us to explore and then present, we welcome ideas.
We do. Same address, Andover Senior Mentors. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you,
very
Andover
much.
Mentors.
Our pleasure.